Hi, I'm Mike Essl. I'm another graphic designer. But more importantly, I'm a Batman nerd. Huge Batman nerd. It all started with the 1966 Batman TV show, starring Adam West and Burt Ward. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the show, it was 30 minutes. It aired twice a week in the 60s. And when it was in syndication, it would air back to back. So there'd be one episode, then a cliffhanger, and then another episode. And that cliffhanger was always framed by same bat time, same bat channel. Let's watch.
I guarantee this machine is fair, so let the game commence.
Horrors, 1 lemon. Double horrors, 2 lemons. And if it's a third, instant and inescapable, 50,000 volts. Close your eyes. Who dares to see it? Try us tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel.
I was in love with this show, in love. It was like a religion to me. And sometimes I wonder, was it the first comic book thing I saw? Maybe that was Fleischer's Superman. Maybe that was Bazooka Joe. But I remember liking Batman early. That's me. So, Batman was designed. It was lettered. Here are some of the villains. Look at the henchmen. They literally say henchman, Yak and Boff, Goon. Every fight scene had lettering. Powie, Awk, Crunch, Boff. I got hooked on Batman, hooked. So I started buying Batman comics, going to comic book conventions. I had over 400 issues of Batman by the time I was 13 or 14. I had 30 Batman t-shirts. I'm from a school, Abington, Pennsylvania. I worked at a comic book store there called the Comic Book Store, a name that would never work in Google times these days. This is my boss. My boss seemed to hate money. He would talk you out of buying comics if they weren't very good. He paid me in comics, and at the time I didn't realize what a good deal that was for him. I like to joke that I walked into the comic book store listening to Madonna, and I walked out listening to Metallica. I got really into some of the things around comics when I was there. I got into Wacky Packs. Show of hands, who's seen Wacky Packs before? I'm curious. Okay. I was especially fond of this one, I remember, the Logs logo. I got into Mad Magazine and started reading all the Mad Magazine back issues we had. And I got into comic book history. So I really became fascinated with who made these comics, right? So this is the first appearance of Batman in Detective Comics 27. And my boss, he turned me on to these two comics, which in the 80s, these were the comics, right? So, so that's Batman The Dark Knight Returns by Frank Miller. And this is, that's The Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. And what's amazing for me in Batman is that my whole life I've hated Superman. And in this comic, Batman destroys Superman and becomes, in my opinion, the mightiest hero there is. That comic also featured the Sons of Batman, or the SOBs for short. And this inspired me to make my first logo. So I made t-shirts with this. There was a fan club. You had to answer questions about Batman if you wanted to get a t-shirt. I was the only member. Watchmen. So what fascinated me about Watchmen was the craft, how well conceived it was, how it was made. There's even one chapter that is the mirror image, right? So you get halfway through the comic, and then the artist flips it over and uses the same panel structure in reverse, right? I became obsessed with who makes these things, or as the Watchmen say, who makes the world. I also became obsessed with the Punisher, which is very embarrassing. This is the best way I can come up with explaining why I love the Punisher so much. The Punisher is known, it's embarrassing because he kills people. That's his superhero. That's his superpower, I mean. This sort of sums up how it works. If you're guilty, you're dead. So I was explaining this to my boss, and he was like, Mike, you know, there's a few comics where the Punisher actually shoots at civilians. And I was like, come on, that can't be true. And he was like, no, here's an issue of Amazing Spider-Man where that happens. So in this issue, the Punisher shoots at somebody for running a red light, and they shoot at somebody for littering. And my 13-year-old mind exploded when I saw this because I understood it to be commentary. The author of this comic did not like the character of the Punisher, did not like that he killed people, so he made a ridiculous cartoon of it. And so what happens next is the next writer has to write that away. So they decided that when the Punisher shot somebody for littering, he was drugged. And they had to make that go away. And again, this is just the minutia of comics, like how they're made. The other comic he told me about was this Kiss comic. You would be so surprised how influential this moment was in my life. Look at how awful this comic is. It's very bad. But what they did in this comic that was just crazy was, as a promotional device, they had their blood drawn and added to the red ink. Right? It's so gross. But I remember thinking, what are printing plates? What is this thing that they're doing? I don't understand any of this. And I remember taking this to my dad and saying, this band Kiss, they're crazy. Do you have any of their records? And my dad had one record, this record, the greatest piece of graphic design in the known universe. I saw this record and I freaked out. I grabbed that record, I went to my junior high school library, and I said, what is this stuff? Right? And they said, it's called graphic design, we have one book on it. So I get this book out of the library and I read it and I realize it doesn't teach me how to make graphic design, it just shows me what it is. So I go to Walden Books and I say, hey, do you have a book on making graphic design? And they have one book. They have the Graphic Designer's Production Handbook. This book changed my life, showed me how to make mechanicals, it showed me how to work on the school newspaper. I worked on the school yearbook because of this book. I basically made my own mechanicals. And as I got into design, I started getting out of comics, and there was a big question of how do I pay to go to art school? Super broke. I had no money to go to art school. But a few years ago, there was a very important comic book event. And in that comic book, the Joker, depicted here with a crowbar, smashes the character Robin. And DC Comics made two phone numbers that you could call, one to kill Robin, or one to keep him alive. I called to kill him. That's the cover. So I stockpiled these issues when it happened. I went around to all the supermarkets in my neighborhood. I bought as many copies as I could. I ended up with about 100 issues. And I got a dealer table at New York Comic Con as a punk kid, put up all my comics and sold them, and I made about $12,000 in profit, and it paid for my first year at Cooper Union. So I get to Cooper Union, and I have this funny question, which is why you hate comics. Cooper Union hates comic books. Anything I wanted to do with comic books, nobody was interested in me doing with comic books. And I was so confused. Comic books taught me about style, right? Look at the range in these depictions of Batman. Comics taught me about type and bold type and weird hand-lettered stuff. Comics were my first exposure to gay characters or characters dealing with HIV. And Cooper Union's crazy because one of the people attributed with the first graphic novel and sometimes considered one of the first comic book artists that's African American went to Cooper Union named Matt Baker. And Peter Cooper had a comic book. Right? So when I graduated, I started this firm called The Chopping Block. And back then, you could start a design firm pretty easy. All you needed was a computer and an ISDN modem. And I partnered with 2 other Cooper Union graduates, and then a 4th Cooper Union graduate, and I made websites. And that was no comics for 10 years. 10 years. And finally, I got a call from Chronicle Books. So after years of web design, I get this call, and they say, do you know anything about Batman? So I switched from web design to book design. This is the second book I've ever done. I'm going to fly through this, but I've done books for Batman Begins. So I got to hold the original appearance of Batman in my hands, and I wept like a baby. That's the original appearance of Batman, and I'll just fly through these. I got to work on the second book for the second Batman movie book. Got to work on a book for Superman Returns. Cover Girls. A lot of Batman in my life. Here's Robin saying hello. Hi. And I got to work on the Watchmen book with Dave Gibbons and Chip Kidd. So that's the case. These are the, you know this slide, Who Makes the World? That's the opening end papers. I got to work with Jerry Robinson, who created Joker and Robin. That's Jerry, hard at work. He's the crankiest guy I ever got to work with in my life. That is the oldest surviving original artwork that depicts Batman, and I got to touch it. This on the right is the original card that Jerry used to pitch DC Comics on the Joker. That is the first depiction of the Joker, and I got to touch it. Okay. Now, like all comic book nerds, I have a podcast. So 2 fat guys and a microphone. This is me and my partner, Ed. And our biggest episode is about Guardians of the Galaxy, and that's Rocket Raccoon from Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, you're starting to wonder, why is he telling us all this? I'm going to get there. So Cooper Union went through a little bit of a crisis. We had not been charging for tuition for 150 years, and we began charging tuition. For 155 years, it was tuition free, and in 2006, the trustees and the president spent all of our money and built a building across the street. And the students protested. And they occupied the president's office for 65 days. And my part was I formed or helped form the Committee to Save Cooper Union with 2 of my friends. And Isabella Pizzula and Claire Kleinman helped us as well. I made this website for us, and we sued. So what happens as a result of the lawsuit? Well, the Cooper Union president resigns. The New York Attorney General reaches a deal to end the litigation, and 5 trustees walk out the door. We now have a new president. We now are on the path back to free. The projection is that we'll be free in 10 years. Woo! Why do I fight? That's my Cooper Union tattoo, in case you think I'm faking. All right, why do I fight? So Rocket Raccoon was invented by Bill Mantlo, who went to Cooper Union. And Bill Mantlo wrote the Punisher story that made me understand the minutiae and retconning in comics. He also invented Cloak and Dagger, which premieres tonight. If we're going to talk about the Punisher, my student, Victor Ochoa, made this logo of the Punisher and the illustration for my podcast. That's Victor right there. And those Mad Magazine issues I read in the comic book store, well, that's funny, because the original Mad Magazine and the introduction of Alfred E. Neuman is by a Cooper Union graduate named Harvey Kurtzman. Those wacky packs I love so much, those are made by Woody Gelman. He also maybe invented the first comic I ever saw, and he invented Mars Attacks. Madonna, oh, her first record was designed by Karen Goldberg. Metallica's first record. I bought this record. It's the first record I ever bought with my own money. I had a patch on my jacket for this record. All my friends came to me because I got into Metallica. The whole subculture opened up to me because of this record. That typeface, Serif Gothic, right, by Herb Bell, right? My high school logo is in Serif Gothic. And maybe you've seen it recently in Star Wars. That Legs logo, hey, check this out. That original was done by Tom Carnesi and Herb Ballin. And if we get back to Metallica, the current Metallica cover was shot by my student, Dmitry Shlebanov, who went to Cooper Union. Now, if we look at both these Metallica records, we might think, hey, they were both released on vinyl. Well, the vinyl record was invented by Emil Berliner, who went to Cooper Union. And you may be thinking, wait a minute, didn't Thomas Edison invent the vinyl record? No, he invented the phonograph, but that's okay because he went to Cooper Union too. Now, I mentioned how to start a web design firm. I needed a computer. Well, all computers have microchips. Microchips can only be made at production scale by an invention by William Gardner Pfaffen, who went to Cooper Union. And that ISDN modem I bought, the T carrier that's based on that was invented by Eric Sumner, who went to Cooper Union, which eliminated the static on the Trans-Pacific and the transatlantic cable, and we know that Peter Cooper was on the boat that laid the cable. So I like to joke that Cooper Union invented the internet. Now, I'll get back to my story a little bit. So if this was the first character I ever saw, well, that was made by Max Fleischer, who went to Cooper Union. And if we're going to talk about Superman, the first Superman logo I ever saw, and the DC Comics logo that I grew up with, was designed by Milton Glaser, who wrote the book I read when I got started. Right? You may know Milton's work. If we're going to talk about DC, the new DC Comics logo was made by Emily Oberman's team, who went to Cooper Union. And if you want to see the DC Comics logo, you should see Wonder Woman, because it was directed by Patty Jenkins, who went to Cooper Union. Those house ads I saw about AIDS and HIV, those were made by Neil Posner, who went to Cooper Union. And this book, so crazy. My first typography teacher and my offset lithography teacher wrote that book. So when I was interviewing at Cooper Union, I showed my portfolio, and Norman says to me, "Do you have anything else?" And I showed him the school newspaper, and I showed him all those things, and he said, "How did you learn to do that?" And I said, "Oh, I read this great book." He goes, "Oh, really? I wrote that book." This record, you know where this is going now. You can see it coming from a mile away. This record, the epiphany I had, the thing that made me go to the library and say, "What is this?" was made by Michael Durrett, who went to Cooper Union. Maybe you know his work. And Batman, who's been in my life like crazy, paying my rent, causing me to make logos, working with Jerry Robinson. We can sum it all up with just this comic. So in the upper left-hand corner is the DC Comics logo by Milton Glaser. The character Robin was somebody I got to work with, Jerry Robinson, who invented Robin. I sold this comic to pay for my first year at Cooper Union, and Batman was invented by Bob Kane, who went to Cooper Union. Now, if that's not enough, I got one more thing. Same bat time, same bat channel. I saw this maybe every day of my life as a kid. What typeface is that? Ad-lib. Ad-lib was designed by Freeman Krall, who went to Cooper Union. Now, who makes the world? Cooper Union makes the world. Thank you.